folks! It's once again an exciting day in the history of the coverage project. We have just entered our 7th state. The number's too big for me to count on one hand now, but welcome to the Mountain State. So sing all the songs you want about country roads, take me home, because we are certainly in West Virginia today. When you think of West Virginia, what do you think about? Obviously mountains, probably coal mining, unfortunately poverty a little, but West Virginia is also home to a lot of history and a lot of culture. So today, why not embark on an adventure to one of the easternmost points, and certainly the easternmost town in West Virginia, Harpers Ferry. Everywhere I go, if there's history to a town, you're gonna find these markers, little signposts in the most random of places, but they have a lot of information. I'd love to take a minute and talk about the geography of West Virginia, because this is what shapes the culture of the state. So when you have a lot of these mountains, West Virginia is the only state which is entirely surrounded by the Appalachian Mountains. And because of that, you have all these mountains which form little pockets of population. I'm gonna cross the street real quick before I get run over by a car, but all these small pockets in the valleys of these mountains are very isolated from each other. So the state developed, didn't have a big population, but was full of these small towns, and Harpers Ferry is just an example of one of them. So because populations didn't really boom here, all you had were little pockets of groups who went into the mountains. There was no real industrialization here compared to states like Pennsylvania and New York and Massachusetts and New England. So as a result, the economy was heavily dependent on things like coal mining. That was the only resource that could be extracted and used to benefit the state of West Virginia. There are a few cities in West Virginia like Charleston and Beckley and Morgantown, but for the most part, the culture of this state really hasn't changed much in its grand history. Much of the state remains very backwoods and rural, but that's what you get when there's only really mountains around us. There's not really much development that goes on. However, right to the left of me, maybe to the right of the video, I don't know, there are some railroads. So that does hint at some sort of development for West Virginia. Enough about the state altogether. Let's actually explore the town of Harpers Ferry. As you can tell, it's very historical, dating back hundreds of years. No wonder people flock here. Not only does it have history, but it's just beautiful. It's a quaint little old town. Not only are the man-made buildings in the town beautiful, but there's also a lot of natural scenery. I mean, for goodness, we're in between the mountains, right next to a convergence of two rivers into one. Now here we are at the convergence of two rivers, the Potomac and the Shenandoah, to form an even greater Potomac River. And over there, as the river flows, it'll eventually lead into Washington, D.C., the capital. Now, who put an advertisement on the face of that mountain? Now, since travel is hard to come by once you reach the Appalachian Mountains, people across the generations of America's history have been trying to find ways to get across these mountains using this river. First it was a ferry, hence the name Harpers Ferry. Then it was the horse-drawn canal. And then finally came the great railroads, which won the battle eventually, until the dawn of automobiles and road transportation. Surely as explorers through the ages came across this convergence, they most likely just stopped in awe to gaze at this beautiful natural sight. This is actually part of the famed Appalachian Trail, which crosses several eastern states from Maine all the way down to Georgia. So people who are avid hikers, who want to conquer this thing, sometimes they'll walk the whole length. And where we are right now is part of it. Not to mention that when we were at Shenandoah National Park, that was also part of the Appalachian Trail. Once again, a magnificent view. You can't beat Harpers Ferry. Some of you may have actually heard of Harpers Ferry before, and that's probably because you've heard about John Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry. John Brown, a famed abolitionist, conducted a pretty big raid here. The marker I'm standing in front of right now, that's his fort over there. It's been moved several times, but it used to be here. After wreaking a lot of havoc here on Harpers Ferry for an abolitionist cause, John Brown and his men were barricaded here and stood the forces of the military for 3 days. It took the might of the US military just to capture John Brown, who was later hanged. Some may say that this was actually the start of the Civil War. Not Fort Sumter, but this insurrection right here in Harpers Ferry. Now here in today's current age, one would consider John Brown a hero. Here in Harpers Ferry at the time, he was not a hero. For the people in this town at the time, who just wanted to go about their daily lives, having different jobs and careers in the different industries in this town, they deemed John Brown as some chaotic person who wanted to overthrow and rebel. So yeah, for the people here, they thought of John Brown as some renegade, some disruptor of the norm. Some deemed him crazy, if you will. Now today you can really see the big details of the town, even the inside of the buildings. Not to mention there's a lot of tourist shops for the people who like getting their little trinkets after their visit, but that's alright. I, as part of the coverage project though, am here for the authenticity. In the Civil War, this became one of the Union's most important strongholds. Where we are right now, it's right next to Pennsylvania, right next to Maryland, and also right next to Virginia, so it's really in the middle of all the action. And that's why the Union wanted to keep it so much. As much as I dislike a lot of the tourist trap parts of the towns we go to, there is one place here in Harpers Ferry we really have to go to. Let me just put it that way. You're an actual historian, right?
So, the woman who owned the store, her name is Sue, and she wrote the whole book on Sue and everything. And amazing research, amazing woman. She knows everything in here about all the history and how it intertwines. But I really have learned from her, so.
Right. Now, I remember going here a couple years ago, and
Yeah.
all I was really interested in was the candy, but then there's this whole history aspect.
Yeah, I know. Like, Altoids, nobody can understand how they're from that date, time period.
Yeah.
But no matter how old you are, you just automatically know what they are. But they actually date back to 1780s. And they used to use it as stomach and gastrointestinal medicine. So who would have thought?
Yeah. How did this store begin? Did she just decide?
She's always been a researcher, she wanted to understand. She was involved in a lot of other initiatives with the White House years and years ago. But her first love wanted to do research and history. And then they came about, I think, like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she's a great woman.
Yeah, I mean, being a candy lover and a history lover, this is paradise for me. So here we are, back in front of John Brown's fort. The place we just saw was called True Treats. Not only is it just an ordinary candy store. It's much more than that. It's a combination of a candy store and sort of like a history museum. They had candies from each era of history. They had like biblical, prehistoric times, then the 1700s, and then the 1800s, to the Civil War, to the early 20th century. It was so cool. And it's actually authentic and historically accurate, which I love. Because where else can you get Chase's Cherry Mash, Cypher's Valo Milk, and Turkish Delight, a tasty treat of gelatinous material dating back to the Middle Ages. Among those things, I also bought this whole collection, an assortment of various historical candy from a specific historical era. It's so exciting. Now, do you all know why I told you it was so worth it to visit this one place? It's more than just a tourist shop. I think it's such a great shop. If you love candy and if you love history, you will love True Treats Historical Candy Shop. Nowhere else but Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I hadn't already said this. Did you know Harpers Ferry was once part of the state of Virginia? Not only the town of Harpers Ferry, but the entire state of West Virginia was once part of Virginia. It makes sense that they'd want to separate. It is culturally isolated from the rest of Virginia. So in 1863, they separated from Virginia to remain with the Union. Harpers Ferry, oh my goodness. All of you, come down here. Nature, history, candy. What more could you expect of a fun day trip? The best part about this place is that the town is completely, very easily walkable. Everything's accessible if you don't mind the steep inclines and declines when you're walking, but it's not an issue. Yes, as you could tell from the candy store experience, I've been here before, but I wanted to come back because this place is so worth a second visit for me and a glimpse for you all. Because who knew such a beautiful and adventurous place could be tucked in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a hidden gem, right in front of the scenic convergence of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers. More travels to come. I will see you at the next location.